Good morning. I'm glad to be here with you. Quite a ways away. I love England. I've been there several times, and it's absolutely a fantastic place. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the Dynasphere, which is Keely's technology. It may well be the technology of the future. We'll get into that a little bit. I'm also going to talk to you about some of the science and some of the stuff we're doing with that. And the biggest surprise is we discovered last year that science, unbeknownst to itself, has been working with what we call God. And they didn't even know it. When they talk about the scalar forces, the scalar potentials, those are undefined, unknowable forces, and science deals with them all the time now, more and more, actually, more and more. But it was only last year that we realized that when they say scalar forces, it's the same thing as talking about God. And I have a little presentation which I'll walk through with you and give you a little bit of information of how that is so and why I say that. Now, the Dynaspheres, I think David has a little presentation there someplace on your premises. The Dynaspheres were originally invented by John Keely in the 1880s. And they operated on these scalar forces, which I'll describe later. In fact, most of his science before he died in 1898 were strictly based on the scalar forces, which we also know to be mind forces. We endeavored to rediscover his science since the early 80s. We created the first Dynasphere in 1995 and 96, thinking we were making a free energy machine. We didn't know about scalar, we didn't know about love, we didn't know about all these other forces at that time. So we made the Dynasphere and we took it to an energy conference in Denver in the summer of 1996. And I come back from lunch one day and there's all these women standing around the Dynasphere with their hands out like this to it, like they're warming their hands on a fire. And I thought that was pretty strange. And I asked them what they were doing. And one of them said, "We're standing here feeling the love come off this machine." And my entire life flashed in front of my eyes when she said that, because I wasn't feeling any energy. All the other ladies there, 8 or 10 of them, all nodded in agreement with what she just said. So I had to admit there's something going on here that I had no clue about. And she chose to call it love. Okay, so I started studying love. Every book, every person I could find, every workshop I could attend, trying to find out what this love thing is. And we discovered a lot. There's a whole huge body of literature, and it spans all the religions. It spans science when you know what to look for. When Keely says sympathetic vibration, that's just a fancy word for love, because when two things are in tune with each other, they're in harmony, what happens to one is experienced by the other. That's a pretty good definition of love. And in that process of new discovery, we took the Dynasphere to a center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we had a lot of people come in Thursday nights mostly, and we had workshops, and I told them, says, "You guys are going to be the guinea pigs." I told them what happened at the conference, and I said, "You guys be around this Dynasphere and tell me what you experienced." So over the next year and a half, we saw some extraordinary things. We saw people being healed mentally, physically, spiritually, physically, and we didn't have an explanation for that. We built a machine. It's made out of metal. We had imbued it with our chi, so we knew there was a strong spiritual component to this, but we didn't know what the mechanism was between the mechanical machine and its spiritual components and this healing that we were seeing happening spontaneously. And over time, we did piece together a paradigm. And most of you already know the secret. The secret is love yourself. When you love yourself, you're in a healthy state. When you don't love yourself, you get disease and all kinds of problems, even in your life experiences. So what's the nature of love? What does that have to do with a mechanical machine? And how does that happen? Well, it has to do with the state of vibration. If we have a number of vibrations and they form a concord, that's harmony. And when you're in a state of harmony, you're in a state of love. And we saw many people approach the Dynasphere, and you could see in their faces and their demeanor that they were beginning to feel this thing called love. And those that went with the feeling, who recognized it and went with it, had an incredible experience, all kinds of different experiences, all positive. And yet we saw some people who were moving into that direction. They started feeling this thing called love, and they pulled back. And they became afraid, and they didn't want to go near it. And that's usually addressed in the concept that these people were hurt by what they thought was love at some time in their past. So when they feel that love and they're reminded of it in their person, in their psyche, they can go to it or they can rebel against it. And it's all very curious. I learned more about people and their psychology than I, it was amazing. It's just an amazing learning experience. So to further that, well, before we get into that, there have been hundreds and hundreds of people around, well, maybe thousands of people around these Dynaspheres over the years. And there has been an interest in having one in Europe. We have 5 of them distributed across the United States, and but none outside the United States. And we want to change that. We want to bring this energy, this knowledge, this awareness to as many people as we possibly can. Because if this energy promotes peace, harmony, and love in people and individuals, then we need to get as many of these out there as we possibly can. And I have a project, and we haven't really talked much about it because we really haven't done much with it. It has to do with the 100th monkey. If we can get 100 of these Dynaspheres spread around the world, is that 100th monkey effect going to kick in for us? And all of a sudden everybody's going to feel this love and peace? Well, I think that's a pretty good project. It's a big project. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be an immense amount of work. But I think it's worthwhile. And you can talk to David there at your conference, and he can fill you in on the Dynaspheres to Europe project. There's also interest in having one in Russia and South Africa and Japan. But not much has happened on those fronts yet. Well, let's talk a little bit about this thing that I said, science recognizes God. But science doesn't recognize God as the ordinary person in the street does. Of course, there's numerous religions, and everyone's got a different concept of what God is. So that just tells us right off the bat, nobody knows what God is. If they did, they'd all agree. Science comes at it trying to understand how the universe works. We live our lives trying to understand how our lives work. So we're all converging on this thing called God. You can pick and choose whatever religion you want and, get whatever understanding you want. In science, they came at it from a different perspective as they didn't want to hear about God. They don't want to hear about anything that they can't demonstrate in a laboratory. And together with that, they have this attitude that if they can't demonstrate it in their laboratory, it doesn't exist. which is kind of a narrow-minded perspective, but they have pushed the envelope on electrical science and nuclear and atomic physics to such a point where they have bumped up against ultimate causes. You know, where does electricity come from? They already know now, after fighting over it for over 100 years, that they don't know what electricity is. They don't know where it comes from. They don't know what its power is. However, if you research the very obscure, very high-end physics papers, you'll find out that they're saying, wait a minute, there are causative forces that go together in very intricate ways that create this thing we call electricity. They can measure electricity. They can't really measure these causes that creates electricity. So these things that they can't really measure, it's called a scalar force or scalar potential. And its definition is we have an energy, we have a force, but it has no motion. If there's no motion, it may be considered neutral, and being neutral, it can't be measured in any way, shape, or form. If it moves, we can detect the motion and we can measure the motion. So these scalar forces, these scalar potentials, can be modeled mathematically, because we can know these scalar forces through our minds and our consciousness, but we can't see them in the laboratory. Science has very begrudgingly acknowledged these forces do exist. They don't know a whole lot about them, and there's a lot of argument about it. It's just like going to a big religious conference. They're always arguing about the cause. Well, here's the physicist going to these conferences, and they're arguing about this cause. What is it? What is its nature? And while they haven't resolved those arguments, they have all pretty much admitted, or those who are open-minded and honest, have admitted, yeah, there's some causative forces at work here. Well, we don't know what they are. However, we know by the traces, the energies they leave behind, that these things do exist. Now, when we studied Keely's work, I put in over 20 years studying Keely's work, coming at it from an ignorant person's perspective, because I didn't know what it was. And only last year, we finally had all these pieces come together for us. Keely's science is the science of the scalar forces. In a parallel time with people like Rudolf Steiner and Edgar Cayce and Walter Russell and Reichenbach and a few of these other people, they all talked about the etheric causative forces. These etheric causative forces are the scalar causative force. They're exactly the same. The vocabulary is different. 120 years ago, we didn't have the research, we didn't have the vocabulary to identify what this ether was. However, in Keely's case, he did. He investigate the nature of these etheric forces. And his entire science was based upon them. So another word or phrase for etheric scalar forces are mind forces. It's something Blavatsky talked a lot about, Steiner talked about, they all talked about it. So Keely could build these very incredible machines, and only he could make it run because he had it tuned to his mind, his thought process. And he could, after a period of time, train other people to operate these machines. So here we've got a convergence of philosophies. We got the ether from the Victorians. We got the quantum physics, mechanics, the modern day science. We've got the mind forces that have been studied by everybody. The psychic forces, they're all thought, like Emoto shows in his snowflakes. These are all being classified right now in our wiki. We have built a wiki so we can bring all these fields together into one cohesive paradigm. For those who need more references, Princeton University, the university where Einstein did his work, the last part of his life, at Princeton University. A professor there undertook a research project, and they spent 28 years on this research project to answer one simple question. Is mind a force? Does mind affect matter? And after 20 years of intensive, rigorous research, the answer was unequivocal. Yes, mind is a force. So if Princeton University says mind is a force and mind is a force, and we really, if we're sincere about what we're doing, we should research that with a very open mind and with as much determination as we can to bring to that investigation. So here's Princeton University, 120 years after Keely's work, giving us support that Keely was working with these forces, and he had a legitimate basis for his pursuit. And it's a new thing for humanity because this new field of research, this new field of energy, is outside of what we call Newtonian physics, which is a physics we all grew up with. Like Newton's laws of physics and whatnot, those pertain to the molecular life, which is all the mass, the corporeal universe. When you get into the scalar universe, the molecular rules of engagement no longer apply because the mind supersedes time and space. And we can do amazing things with that. For instance, we made a dinosphere, not fully knowing what we were doing, and it became evidence of what we're talking about. People can feel and know these energies on the subtle inner mind level and the heart level, especially the heart level. So we stumbled upon this thing, and it's opening up a vast realm of possibilities for us. So when they, I've talked to a few scientists, I've engaged in a few discussions on the internet with people who claim to be atheists, they don't believe in God. And what they're really saying is they don't believe in the common definition of God. But when I explain to them what the scalar forces are, the spiritual, psychic, mind, thought forces are, then they begin to open up to that and say, yeah, well, that's a real good possibility. So we're about to bridge some major areas of conflict in our societies now. And this is not just my work that's doing this. I see a lot of people work with this all over the internet. And so it's a growing phenomenon. Has some interference there. Well, I want to answer any questions anybody has. Can we get some questions? This might be a new topic for most of you. Yes, I can. Okay. Good idea. Good idea. I'll do that. John Keely was a lone inventor. He grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the 1800s. He did all kinds of things when he was younger. One day he started working with sound and vibration. We believe that while he was an organist in a church, he saw the windows rattle when he played certain chords of music, and that intrigued his curiosity, so he explored that tremendously. In the 1860s, he had developed a motor, which he called the Keely Motor, and that motor was actuated by alternating pulsations of water and air. And that's the famous Keely motor. If you look on the web, you'll find a lot about the Keely motor. A word of caution is he made over 100 different models, so there's different stories pertaining to different models. In the later years, while investigating the principles of sound and music and vibration, he discovered a principle of rotation. Science does not even to this day recognize a principle of rotation. However, if you look around you, every single thing in the universe rotates. Every planet, you're on a planet, you're rotating. And so it is a natural phenomenon. He discovered this, and he began building machines to use this natural principle of rotation. And he developed, at that point, is when he developed the dinosaurs. And he said, this is going to be the power of the future. There were a lot of economic and political people arrayed against him at that time in the 1880s. There was a worldwide effort to develop a power system that would power the world. Nikola Tesla was working with Edison, and Westinghouse came along, and he wanted to do it, and many different other systems were in process. It was Westinghouse and Tesla became a powerhouse, and Edison and Morgan became another powerhouse, and they together pretty much eventually dominated the whole energy business in the world. Keely's system scared these people because his system didn't require oil, it didn't require chemical fuels of any kind whatsoever, and they kind of put a fence around Keely so he couldn't develop his system and get it into the market. And when he died, there was an effort done to obfuscate everything he did. He had written books about his work, but to this day, almost 30 years, I've never seen a book written by John Keely, although we know they've been printed. So it was part of the same old human thing, power and control, power and control. So Keely's work is to free us all up from that, and eventually it will, because what are we working with? Love. You can't prosecute and torment and economically rape anybody when you're loving them. If you're not in love, these machines aren't going to work for you. So it's a whole new perspective. And Keely also went on and developed hundreds of machines. And we have listed quite a few of them on the wiki, the svpwiki.com, if you want to check this out. And some of the curious machines he developed was one machine that he could aim it. It was like a ray gun. He could aim it at a quartz rock, and the quartz would disintegrate into dust. And if there was any metal like gold in the quartz, the gold would just lay there as a lump of metal in this dust. He also developed what he called aerial navigation in the late 1880s or the early 1890s. He had a machine that would fly. He flew it all over Philadelphia and other places. And it did not require chemical fuels. It didn't make any noise. It was like this big, huge metal platform, and he had a keyboard on it. And he'd sit there and play the keyboard, and this thing would fly all over the place. Sounds a little bit like those ancient India Vimanas that we've been hearing about. Operates on sound and vibration and music. He also made a machine. He said it was a small box, and he would attach this box to the front end of a streetcar, and it would pull the streetcar. And there's not much written about that. And I believe, though, he was able to turn inertia on and off. So as he moved a little joystick or whatever mechanism he had to control it, the car would just move forward. Instead of sitting in one spot, it would move forward or move back. So he indeed had a technology that was beyond anything anybody had any idea about. He could go across the room and draw a symbol on the wall, and the motor on the other side of the room would start spinning and operating. So he understood the connection between thought and power and thought and mechanics. And we're just now beginning to understand those things. There has been an effort in society for the past 100, maybe even longer than that, 100 years, to discourage people from investigating anything that had to do with mind. So if you talk about sixth sense or psychic ability or telekinesis or clairvoyance, all of these things were discouraged because those are where the power is. And as we discover these principles and we understand that they are ours to use because they belong to us, then that's liberating. It liberates us. When we begin to understand who we are and what we are, we can reach this state of liberation from anything and everything that has been holding us back, holding us down, and we can have a future unlimited because our imagination, our minds is unlimited, and it's laid right before us now for us to do these things. So, okay, anybody have any questions about those things? Okay, that's all right. Thank you. That's a good question. I wasn't going to go into things like that because we're a little technical, but in the simplest terms, Keely could take liquid water and subjecting it to certain types of vibrations, he could disassociate that water. So it would become like a water vapor. It would go from liquid to a vapor. And with his other machines, he could disassociate that vapor into its hydrogen and oxygen components, which is pretty extraordinary in those days. He wasn't doing it with electricity. And then he discovered that he could disassociate the hydrogen and the oxygen into its constituent components. So he would wind up with a plasma gas made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And being the kind of fellow he was, he dissociated those. And we know today that electrons are made up of photons. So he was breaking liquid water into oxygen and hydrogen, breaking those into electrons, breaking those into photons, and then he went a step further and broke the photons into quarks. And you got to remember, this is in the 1880s. In the 1880s, the conventional accepted view of atoms were that they were indivisible. They were hard billiard ball-like particles, and they could not be disassociated into smaller pieces. Well, when Keely did this, he called this final product, this plasma, ultra plasma, it was ether. He called it his etheric vapor. Now, in the Victorian days, everybody used the term ether because they didn't know what caused the physical world. They said, well, there's got to be this etheric substance from which the material world is derived. In Keely's work, he showed what the ether really is. It is our quantum world today. We understand all these subatomic particles. Those as a collective group is what they used to call ether. So modern science is working with the old ether. They just change the terms so they don't embarrass each other. And they also do it to mystify everybody else. They look like the great priest of science. So anyhow, Keely made a lot of machines to work with this etheric substance. And he made machines, you got to understand, there are many different types of this substance that he made. Many different kinds of plasmas, and they have different characteristics. So one machine would work on one type of ether or subatomic plasma, and other machines would work on others. And he further discovered that the substance of mind, the mind that we attained when we do telekinetic things and when we do clairvoyance, like knowing things at a distance, or we use our minds to affect anything going on in our lives, that is the ultimate fine etheric substance. The next step beyond that, well, I get into a lot more detail. So when so mind is this ultrafine etheric substance. So when we think thoughts, in my presentation in 1994, which you can find on the web, I talk about how that can happen. It has to do with sympathy, sympathetic vibration. So the mind, this etheric substance is sensitive to thought. And this etheric substance permeates everything in the universe, every atom, every molecule, every cubic space on Mars or another star or any place else. It's all the same substance, and it's all extremely sensitive to your thought. You don't have to be a special guru or anything. Everybody thinks, everybody affects this stuff. And as your thoughts go out from you, that's the way it will mirror it back to you. So it's like that movie on Contact where Jodie Foster touches this invisible substance while she was on the beach. It's a very good analogy. Your thoughts reach out and touch this etheric mind stuff, and then it comes back to you. It gives you back what you put into it. It's exactly mirror. And that's what Keely found out in his machines. His original Keely motor, he was trying to operate off of a low-level etheric substance. You know, he'd break water and have this vapor, and he would get this motor to work. Well, he discovered after 20 years of very hard work that the etheric substance would not work to drive anything, especially his motor. He said what the etheric substance is good for is it is a conveyor of a natural pulsing, expanding force. That's the force that Russell called the universal heartbeat. And there is this expansion and contraction force in nature. Your heart, every cell in your body, the planets in their orbits, they all have this universal heartbeat. And Keely was able to arrange the etheric vapors or the etheric substances in such a way that they were sympathetic to this heartbeat. And the engines would start to pulsate, and he could convert that to rotation. So there is a natural phenomenon out there. We all are part of it. It's a shame that even though this knowledge was known for over 100 years, none of us have been taught about it. No one's ever explained it to us. And yet it's all there. And our effort here at the Institute is to rediscover these connecting principles that connect the mind force, the scalar forces, what we call spiritual forces are all one, into mechanics, mechanical machines, so that we can have a lot better future. We don't have to pump oil out of the ground, and we have to pay a bunch of rich people more money. We can have a much better life for ourselves. And that's what the dinosaurs are for. The dinosaurs work off of this universal heart principle. And the more people who think along those lines and become sympathetic to what we're doing, the greater this energy becomes as a power and a force in the world. In the early 1800s, maybe the 1700s, I think it was Faraday or somebody, talked about the noosphere around the Earth. And the noosphere is a combined mindset of everybody on the planet. It's like this atmosphere of mind force, these etheric forces, the mind forces we were talking about, surrounding the Earth. And as we are, so that noosphere is too. And it reflects back to us what we pump into it. So we've had war and all these difficulties. Now we want to turn that around. When I discovered that the dinospheres are pumping out this love energy that affects people who get near it, I said, why don't we just make a whole bunch of them and we'll pump this love energy into the noosphere? If we could put a predominant amount of love energy into the noosphere, we're all going to get modulated with that right back to us. And it's simple little physics. There's no big mystery to that. So that's what we're going to do. You know, the Maharishi people, the TM people, discovered after many years of research that a certain number of people meditating in a town or a city can dramatically reduce crime rates in that city simply because these people are sitting there meditating. So they're sending out this mind force. They're modulating the mind force around them. And when you're in that field of quiet mind, you sense that and you remember what that's like because that's what you are, and everybody becomes more peaceful. That's exactly what happens in the proximity of a dinosaur. It's like a master meditator sitting there inside the dinosaur, and you feel that, you love that, you just respond to it. Women especially, women are much more sensitive than the men, and they respond quicker to the dinosaurs. So it's all about the mind force, which is God. We can go in that too, but I don't think we got enough time. But it's all about love, folks. We got a science here based on love, and we're bringing that into the world.